I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the dock worker sprinting toward me, waving his arms like he was trying to direct an emergency landing. His face was red, his eyes wide, and before I could even ask what had happened, he yelled, "Your boat! It's gone!" For a second, my brain refused to process his words. Gone? My boat? That wasn't possible. I had tied it up myself, double knotted like always. It wasn't some flimsy rental. It was my pride and joy, the sea breeze, a boat I had spent years perfecting. Then the real horror hit me. This wasn't just any theft. This was her, Karen. I whipped around, scanning the water, and there she was, a blonde menace in a sun hat, gripping the wheel of my boat like she owned it. Music blared from the speakers and she was waving at confused boaters like she was royalty. My stomach dropped. The dock worker, still panting, tried to explain. "She said she was just taking it for a quick ride," he stammered. "Quick ride?" I repeated, feeling my pulse hammer in my skull. That was a phrase you used when borrowing someone's bike, not a damn boat. I fumbled for my phone, barely registering Jim, my best friend, jogging up beside me, mid-sip from his iced coffee. "What's going on?" he asked. Then he followed my gaze. He blinked, then did a double take. "Wait, is that? No. No way. Oh my God, it's her. It's her!" I gritted through clenched teeth. Karen had been a thorn in my side for months, a walking, talking tornado of entitlement. She lived a few houses down and had made it very clear that she believed boats should be shared among the community. Her reasoning? Not everyone can afford one, and that's just unfair. The last time I'd seen her, she had been passive-aggressively admiring my boat, sighing loudly about how she wished she had one, and how unfair it was that some people hoarded luxury items. I had laughed it off, never imagining she would actually have the audacity to steal it. And yet, there she was, at the helm of my boat. I could already see the disaster unfolding. Karen was no captain. Hell, I doubted she even knew how to start a lawnmower, let alone steer a vessel. She was tilting wildly, swerving between boats, ignoring the angry shouts of actual sailors. Jim let out a low whistle. "Well, buddy, you're either going to need a lawyer or the Coast Guard." I was already dialing. I didn't bother calling Marina Security. They were a joke. Instead, I went straight to the real authorities. As I waited for the Coast Guard to pick up, I gritted my teeth, watching Karen take a selfie with her phone in one hand and the steering wheel in the other. Unbelievable. The call connected. "Coast Guard, what's your emergency?" "Yeah, hi. My boat's been stolen." That got their attention. "Stolen? Can you provide a description?" "Oh yeah," I said, my voice tight. "It's a 24-foot cruiser named Seabreeze, currently being piloted by a lunatic in a sun hat who has no idea what she's doing." Jim choked on his coffee. "Did you just call her a lunatic to the Coast Guard?" The officer on the other end paused, then asked in a perfectly neutral voice, "Do you know the individual?" I exhaled. "Unfortunately, yes." I could hear keys clacking as they took down the information. "We're dispatching a patrol boat now. Is she armed?" I watched as Karen attempted to do some sort of twirl with the boat, nearly taking out a dock ladder. "Only with stupidity," I muttered. Jim, still sipping his coffee, was now recording everything on his phone. "Dude, this is gold. We're going to be famous." I didn't care about fame. I cared about getting my boat back in one piece. Meanwhile, Karen was having the time of her life. She was taking another selfie, probably captioning it with something ridiculous like, "Living my best life." Sure, yacht life, mwah, blessed. I barely had time to be angry before things got worse. A fisherman in a tiny skiff had to throw himself overboard as Karen nearly mowed him down. My jaw clenched so hard I thought I might crack a tooth. The Coast Guard officer came back on the line. "We have a visual on your vessel. Our team is moving in. Do you want to press charges?" "Yes," I said immediately. Jim raised an eyebrow at me. "You sure about that?" I turned to look at him, incredulous. "She stole my boat, Jim." He sipped his coffee, completely unfazed. "Yeah, but think about the memes. You could be a legend." Before I could respond, a burst of static crackled over the phone, and I heard the Coast Guard radioing in. "We have the suspect in sight. She appears uncooperative." Uncooperative? I squinted. Karen had just taken off her sun hat and was now arguing with the Coast Guard, waving her phone in their faces like she was trying to prove she had permission to be on my boat. I shoved my phone at Jim and took off down the dock to get a better look. "You're not going to jump in, are you?" Jim called after me. I wanted to, but I wasn't stupid. The Coast Guard had this. That didn't mean I wasn't going to watch every second of Karen's impending downfall. As I reached the edge of the dock, I saw the patrol boat closing in. A Coast Guard officer was shouting instructions through a bullhorn. Karen ignored them. Then, to my absolute horror, she gunned the engine. "Oh, you idiot!" I shouted. The boat lurched forward, Karen laughing like this was some kind of game. But Karma wasn't having it. With an ear-splitting crunch, Sea Breeze slammed into a buoy. Karen was thrown forward, nearly face-planting into the wheel. The Coast Guard wasted no time. Within seconds, officers were boarding my boat, securing the engine, and yanking Karen away from the controls. She was screeching, flailing her arms like a toddler denied a toy. "I was going to bring it back," she protested. The officers weren't amused. One of them grabbed her by the wrist as she kept babbling. "It's not stealing if I return it. It's a borrow." Jim doubled over laughing. "Did she just say a borrow? Oh man, this is priceless." I wasn't laughing. I was too busy staring at my boat, my beautiful damaged boat. The hull had a nasty dent from the collision. I could already tell I'd be dealing with repairs. My stomach churned. One of the Coast Guard officers signaled to me. "Sir, are you the owner?" I nodded. "Do you want to press charges?" I looked over at Karen. She was still protesting, insisting this was all a misunderstanding. Then she made the mistake of turning to me. "You wouldn't do that, would you?" she pleaded. Oh, she had some nerve. I crossed my arms. "You stole my boat. You almost killed a fisherman. You crashed into a buoy. And now I have to fix your mess." She scoffed. "Oh my God, it's just a boat ride. You're being so dramatic." That did it. I turned to the officer. "Throw the book at her." Karen's jaw dropped. "What?" Jim clapped me on the back. "Oh, this is going to be good." As the Coast Guard hauled Karen off my boat, I finally allowed myself to exhale. The nightmare wasn't over, but at least the worst was behind me. Or so I thought. Because when Karen turned back to me, her eyes flashing with rage, I knew this wasn't the last I'd be hearing from her. And that was the real problem. Karen wasn't going quietly. The Coast Guard officers had her in cuffs, but she was flailing like a cat being dragged into a bathtub. Her sun hat had long since flown off, and her once perfectly styled blonde hair was now a disaster, strands sticking out in every direction. She looked more like a shipwreck survivor than a boat thief, but somehow she still had the nerve to act like the victim. "This is ridiculous," she shrieked. "You can't just arrest people for borrowing things." One of the officers, a tall man with mirrored sunglasses and the patience of a saint, barely flinched. "Ma'am, you are being detained for the unauthorized use of a marine vessel, reckless endangerment, and failure to comply with maritime regulations." Karen let out a dramatic gasp, like he had just accused her of high treason. Reckless endangerment? Oh, please. I was perfectly in control. I've driven jet skis before. This was no different. The officer raised an eyebrow. "You nearly capsized a fishing boat, collided with a buoy, and sped through a no-wake zone. That's reckless endangerment." Karen crossed her arms and scoffed. "That's all just technicalities. No one got hurt." Then she turned to me and fixed me with a glare so intense that if looks could sink ships, Sea Breeze would have been at the bottom of the ocean. "You're really going to let them do this to me? Over a little joyride?" I stared at her, trying to comprehend the sheer audacity. "Karen, you stole my boat. Oh my God, for the last time I borrowed it. And I was going to bring it back. I don't see what the big deal is." I took a deep breath, forcing myself not to explode. "Karen, borrowing requires permission. You didn't ask. You just took it." She rolled her eyes like I was some nitpicking bureaucrat denying her a minor convenience. "Well, duh. I knew you'd say no. That's why I didn't ask." Jim, who had been quietly recording the whole thing on his phone, let out a bark of laughter. "Oh, wow, that's an amazing legal defense. I knew you'd say no, so I took it anyway. Karen, you should be a lawyer." Karen whipped around to glare at him next. "Shut up, Jim." Jim just smirked and took another sip of his coffee. Touchy. Meanwhile, the Coast Guard officers had had enough. They finally secured Karen in handcuffs, which only made her more dramatic. She gasped like someone had just yanked a royal crown off her head. Excuse me. This is unbelievable. Do you know who I am? Officer Riley, the woman leading the team, adjusted her radio without looking up. Number, and I don't care. Karen's jaw dropped. You can't just... We can, Officer Riley interrupted. And we are. At that moment, a new arrival stepped onto the dock. Todd, Karen's husband. His face was a mix of exhaustion and resignation, like a man who had been through this exact scenario one too many times. He rubbed his temples as he approached Karen. His voice was flat, tired. Karen, what did you do? Karen immediately turned on him, like he was the problem. Oh, don't Karen me. They're overreacting. I just took his boat for a little while. It's not like I stole a car. Todd turned to me, his face filled with apology and deep, deep shame. I am so sorry, he said. I don't even know what to say. I shrugged, still too angry to fully accept his apology. Not much to say, man. Your wife stole my boat. Todd sighed. Yeah, I figured. Jim leaned toward me and whispered. He didn't even look surprised. I nodded. Probably not his first time dealing with this. Todd rubbed his face, then turned back to Karen. I told you not to do this. I told you. Karen scoffed. Oh, come on, Todd. Are you really going to take his side over mine? Todd hesitated, clearly debating the wisdom of his next words. Then he exhaled, looked at the Coast Guard officers and said, Yeah, Karen, I am. Karen's face twisted in betrayal. Todd. Todd threw his hands up. Karen, I don't know how to keep defending this kind of stuff. It's always something with you. Karen turned back to me, her expression shifting into something that might have been genuine remorse, if she weren't so infuriatingly self-centered. Look, she sighed, if it's really that big of a deal, I'll pay for the damages, okay? Just don't press charges. I shook my head. Too late. Her eyes widened. Wait, what? The Coast Guard is handling this now. It's out of my hands. Karen's face went through several shades of horror before she let out an incredulous laugh. Oh my God, you are such a baby about this. I clenched my jaw. Karen, you put other people in danger. You don't just get to walk away from that. She opened her mouth to argue, but Todd cut in. Karen, just stop. You're not getting out of this. She turned to him, eyes pleading. But Todd, honey. No, Todd said firmly. No more excuses. Karen looked at him, then at the Coast Guard officers, then at me. She finally seemed to realize that there was no getting out of this one. Her shoulders slumped, and she muttered something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like, this is so unfair. As the Coast Guard led her toward their boat, Jim let out a low whistle. Man, she really thought she could Karen her way out of that. I shook my head, still trying to process the insanity of the last hour. I'm just glad it's over. But Jim, ever the troublemaker, just grinned. Oh, buddy, it's not over. I frowned. What do you mean? Jim held up his phone, showing me the screen. Dude, I posted the video of her screaming about a borrow 15 minutes ago. I blinked. Jim wiggled his eyebrows. It already has 20,000 views. A slow, almost wicked grin spread across my face as I realized what that meant. Karen had made her bed, and now she was about to be famous for it. And something told me that was going to drive her even crazier than the Coast Guard ever could. By the time the Coast Guard hauled Karen onto their patrol boat, a small crowd had gathered at the dock. Fellow boaters had come to witness the spectacle. Some were whispering, others were openly laughing, and a few were already scrolling through their phones, probably watching the now viral video Jim had uploaded. Karen sat on the patrol boat's bench, arms crossed, her face scrunched up like a child who had been told they couldn't have dessert. She still hadn't fully accepted that she was actually in trouble. Every few seconds, she'd huff and mutter something to the officers, as if expecting them to suddenly realize this was all a huge misunderstanding and let her go. Meanwhile, Todd stood at the dock, rubbing his face like a man who had aged 10 years in an hour. He finally looked up at me and let out a deep sigh. I swear I don't know what to do with her. I wanted to feel bad for him, but I couldn't bring myself to. Might be time to start with actions have consequences. Todd gave a humorless chuckle. Oh, I've tried. Believe me. Jim, still grinning like a kid on Christmas morning, stepped up beside me. So, what do you think her Yelp review of the Coast Guard is going to look like? I snorted. 1 star. Did not let me keep stolen boat. Rude. Todd groaned. That's not even a joke. She actually leaves reviews like that. I stared at him. You're kidding? Wish I was, Todd muttered. One of the Coast Guard officers approached me. Sir, we're going to need you to fill out some paperwork regarding the incident. And if you'd like to press additional charges beyond what we've already cited her for, now's the time. Karen perked up at that, whipping her head toward me. Oh, come on, you don't have to do that. You've made your point. I crossed my arms. Have I? Because you still don't seem to think you did anything wrong. Karen scoffed. I've already said I'll pay for the damages. What more do you want? Jim spoke up before I could. An ounce of self-awareness? Karen shot him a glare so fierce it could have melted steel. I turned back to the officer. What happens if I don't press any additional charges? She'll still face fines, a temporary boating ban, and mandatory community service, the officer replied. But if you'd like to pursue additional legal action, that's your choice. I glanced at Karen. She was still glaring at Todd, as if this was somehow his fault. I wasn't the type to hold a grudge, but this wasn't just a simple case of a neighbor borrowing something without asking. She had put people in danger, damaged my boat, and had the gall to act like she was the victim. Still, I wasn't about to drag this out for months in court. I shook my head. I think the public humiliation is punishment enough. Karen looked almost relieved, until Jim added, plus, she's never going to live this down. This video is everywhere. Karen's eyes snapped to him. Wait, what? Jim grinned and held up his phone. Oh yeah, the internet loves you, Karen. Karen lunged forward as if she could somehow stop it, only to be yanked back by the officer. Take that down. That's illegal. Jim raised an eyebrow. No, it's not. You were in public and I filmed an actual crime happening. That's fair game. Karen turned to Todd, pure desperation in her eyes. Todd, do something. Todd actually seemed to think about it for half a second, then shrugged. You did this to yourself, Karen. Karen let out an inhuman noise, somewhere between a shriek and a groan. The officer, clearly done with this entire ordeal, signaled for his team. All right, let's get moving. We'll be in touch regarding your boat repairs, sir. I nodded, watching as they pulled away from the dock, with Karen still muttering to herself about the injustice of it all. As soon as they were out of earshot, Jim burst out laughing. Oh my God, that was art. Todd let out another exhausted sigh, rubbing his temples. I need a drink. Jim patted him on the back. Man, you deserve one. The fallout. The next few days were a blur of insurance calls, repair estimates, and way too many notifications from people sending me clips of the video. It had exploded overnight. Millions of views. People couldn't get enough of Karen's rant about a borrow. Someone had even remixed it into a song. I wasn't sure what was funnier, the fact that she had become a meme, or the fact that she had no idea yet. That changed when I saw her at the marina a week later. She had shown up for her first day of community service, wearing oversized sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low over her face. It didn't help. Everyone still recognized her. I was sitting on a bench when she spotted me. Her expression went from embarrassed to furious in record time. She stomped over, cleaning supplies rattling in the bucket she was carrying. This is your fault, she hissed. I raised an eyebrow. My fault? You stole my boat, Karen, she scoffed. I wouldn't even be here if it weren't for that stupid video. Jim, who was standing next to me, grinned. Oh, you saw it? Karen clenched her jaw. It's everywhere. People at the grocery store point at me. Jim nodded, looking far too pleased. Yeah, that makes sense. It's got like, what, 15 million views now? Karen groaned. I hate the internet. I leaned back, enjoying the moment. Maybe next time, don't steal a boat. Karen glared at me, then looked around, clearly searching for someone to back her up. No one did. Most people avoided eye contact entirely, probably hoping they wouldn't get dragged into whatever meltdown she was about to have. With a frustrated sigh, she stomped off toward the dockside bathrooms, where her assigned cleaning duties awaited. Jim shook his head, watching her go. Man, you think she learned anything? I smirked. Not a chance. Jim grinned. Still, best day ever. And honestly, I couldn't help but agree. Lesson learned. Some people never learn. Karen believed that rules didn't apply to her, that she could take whatever she wanted, bend reality to fit her entitlement, and Karen her way out of any consequence. But the world doesn't work that way. Actions have consequences. And thanks to the internet, she was now a cautionary tale for entitled boat thieves everywhere. Sometimes karma works fast.